Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us today. We're celebrating Cleveland Water's 165th year of serving our community. Woo! So, we don't want to keep you out here alone. I'm going to ask that our commissioner, Alex McGaviches, come. Uh, One other thing, would you please make sure that your phone is on silent, even though we're outside? Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, and welcome everyone. And happy birthday, Cleveland Water, again. We chose today to celebrate because Cleveland Water was born exactly 165 years ago today, and right here on this spot. We are honoring the man. Theodore Ransom Scowden, a distinguished and nationally recognized hydraulics engineer who had the vision and the drive to bring drinking water to Cleveland. It was in the 1850s that Cleveland commissioned Mr. Scowden to build us a municipal water system. Our very first facility was a pump station right here on Division Avenue, about 1,000 feet east of where we're sitting. The intake tunnel that brings lake water into this site runs right under Division Avenue, right behind us. Now, before we go further, there are so many people that need a special shout out. There's no way we could mention all of them, but here are a few key ones. First and foremost has been Mayor Frank Jackson, whose tenure as mayor is soon ending, but who's been extremely supportive of Cleveland Water, providing us the resources we've needed to do our work. The mayor's administration, and especially our utilities directors over the years, including our current director, Martin Kane, have provided us excellent leadership and direction. And Cleveland City Council, with a number of representatives here today, have also been very supportive in advancing our agenda. But most of all, I want to thank all of our great employees, past and current, of the Department of Public Utilities and the Division of Water in particular. There are so many smart, caring, passionate people who take seriously our mission to bring great drinking water to 1.4 million people in the region. We all know the challenges and frustrations that come along with working in the public sector, but today is one of those really special days that helps bring perspective to the important work we do and makes it all worthwhile. Now, we'd be here all day if I tried to name all of these special people, but you know who you are. It is and has been my privilege and honor to work with you. So we have a great program today, including a couple speakers who tell us what Cleveland was like 165 years ago, and about Mr. Scowden and his work in particular. So without further ado, here is our first speaker, Director Marty Kane.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good morning, everybody. On behalf of Mayor Jackson, who congratulates all of Cleveland Water and sends his regrets for not being here today, but I would recognize Council President Kevin Kelly from Ward 13 and our Utilities Chairman Brian Casey from Ward 16. Thank you both for joining us today. A lot of the work that Cleveland Water does is behind the scenes. You turn on a faucet without much thought of where it comes from or how it gets there, which is how we prefer it at Cleveland Water. But it's nice on occasion to take a moment and recognize all the hard work that's involved in delivering quality water throughout our service area. Looking at the history of Cleveland Water is a reminder of how far we've come and that our mission remains exactly the same. The reports drafted in the 1850s to study the development of a public water system pointed out how much a system would improve the health and quality of life for residents across the city, providing clean, accessible water for cooking, cleaning, fire protection, and drinking. In 1856, that meant pulling water from a few hundred feet out into Lake Erie and pumping it through 11 miles of water mains to roughly a few thousand people. Today, our top priority remains the health and safety of our community and providing residents and businesses with all the benefits of a safe, reliable supply of water. It's a little different now with 4 water treatment plants with intakes of their own miles out into Lake Erie, 5,300 miles of water mains serving 1.4 million people. The core of Cleveland Water is providing the best service to our customers to help make the city of Cleveland a great place to live, work, and play. I'm proud today to recognize the starting point of that mission and all the progress we've accomplished in these 165 years. It is now my pleasure to introduce Council President Kevin Kelly, who will present to Commissioner Margevicius a resolution on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Mask down. Thank you, Marty. My name is Kevin Kelly, and on behalf of myself and my 16 colleagues on Cleveland City Council, I just want to really take this moment to thank all of the men and women of the Division of Water, those that are here with us today and those that have preceded us, on what a great product this is. And it is amazing to think about what we take for granted, and as Marty said, that's the way it should be. But it's never lost on me when we look at the Division of Water, what an absolute marvel of engineering and human progress this is. If you listen to some of the comments previously, a lot of what happened in the building of the Division of Water took place pre-Civil War. To me, it is amazing that there were intake cribs built hundreds of feet out in this era. How that happens, I don't know. All I know is that when I turn on my water, it's clean, it's safe, and I appreciate that. But the Cleveland Division of Water really is a tremendous asset for this community. It is really something that we should take for granted, but we shouldn't. We should take for granted the fact that when we turn our faucets on, we have clean, safe drinking water, but it should never be lost on us all of the great feats of engineering, the human accomplishment that is built into our Division of Water. And it started pre-Civil War, but it continues today, and I think we should just never lose sight of how important this is to the health of our community. So with that, I want to present this resolution to Alex in recognition of Scowden Way when we do this street research. On behalf of the members of Cleveland City Council, I am honored to offer this proclamation in recognition of the ceremonial dedication and street sign and right-of-way of Scowden Way in the city of Cleveland. And you've been to these before. I'm not going to read the whole resolution, but please understand that the maintaining and the making sure that this division continues to be the great asset that it is on in the future is the absolute priority of the council. So thank you. Alex?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay.
Thank
Me again. Sorry, I did want to take a minute and introduce Councilmember Jenny Spencer from Ward 13. From Ward 15, I apologize. And it is my pleasure to now introduce, is Mayor Bain with us? The mayor of the city of Pepper Pike and the chairman of the Suburban Water Council of Governments, Mayor Bain.
Good morning. It's a great privilege to be here this morning for this wonderful dedication, and I welcome you all here today. It's my privilege to have served as the chair of the Cleveland Suburban Water Council of Governments for the last several years. The partnership between the City of Cleveland Division of Water and its suburban partners is a outstanding example of regional cooperation and partnership. Through that partnership, City of Cleveland has helped maintain one of the most wonderful divisions of water in the United States. And it is a privilege to participate under the wonderful leadership of Alex Margevicius. This is just throughout the nation recognized as one of the most outstanding leaders in the delivery of safe and quality water to the residents of the region. Again, it is simply a privilege to work with these fine people and to mutually benefit and move forward with projects such as this and others to ensure the safety and the quality of the water throughout Cleveland and the region. So thank you very much, Alex, and all the others who work so hard to maintain the quality of our water system. So thank you very much.
I know I introduced Councilmember Spencer, but I would invite her up for some brief remarks. This is Councilmember Spencer's home ward and certainly a great partner of the Department of Public Utilities as we follow their guidance and their legislative priorities as we move this system forward. So, Councilmember.
Thank you so much, Director Kane. What a beautiful morning in Ward 15. I'm so honored to be here, and just wanted to remark that this is really, as you can see, this is really one of the undiscovered parts of Ward 15. I don't think most residents realize how cool it is down here. And since Scowden Way is a publicly dedicated street, I think I might tell people to come and check this out. It's so great. I mean, with Great Lakes Shipyard right behind us, what a fabulous and fascinating backdrop. And I think part of the message here too is economic development. I know that Great Lakes Shipyard has a lot of plans ahead in terms of expansion, and I know that the city of Cleveland will accompany them in that as we maximize our wonderful natural resources of Lake Erie and the Cuyahoga River. And I also simply like to recognize Council President Kevin Kelly and Utilities Chair Councilman Brian Casey. I'm so proud to be part of Cleveland City Council. I've represented Ward 15 on council since last November, and I'm so pleased and proud that council has a role in this, and I look forward to deepening my own relationship with Cleveland Water. So thank you so much.
Truly wouldn't be a birthday party without our chairman and Councilman of Ward 16, Brian Casey. So I would offer a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And happy birthday to Mr. Scowden and Cleveland Division of Water. You know, a lot of things, the city of Cleveland does a lot of things, but a lot of things that we do go unnoticed. And one of those is the water. Every time you turn that water tap on, or you flush that toilet, or you take that shower, you wash those clothes, you know, it's just taken for granted that the water is going to be there. And for the city of Cleveland to be able to provide that kind of service to 1.4 million people in the region on a daily basis and more than one time a day surely does say a lot about the people who've been running it, from Mr. Scowden all the way to Director Kane, and under the leadership of Mayor Jackson and President Kevin Kelly. It really is a gem for the city of Cleveland, and I couldn't be prouder to be a chairman of the department that's able to provide this kind of service to the city of Cleveland. So congratulations, Director Kane and Commissioner Alex, because I can never pronounce your last name. And again, congratulations on the 165th birthday of Cleveland Water. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Next speaker is going to be Dr. John Grabowski. John Grabowski is in the history department at Case Western Reserve University. He's also the chief historian and senior vice president of research and publications at the Western Reserve Historic Society. And anybody who knows anything about history of Cleveland knows that this book right here, the Encyclopedia of Cleveland History, is like the go-to resource. And John wrote this book. So we have a true expert here. A long time ago, John was teaching a history of Cleveland class at Case Western Reserve, and he created a love of Cleveland history in this young, nerdy engineering undergrad who was taking most of his classes on the other side of Euclid Avenue at the time. So with that, Dr. John, please.
Thanks so much, Alex. I actually was going to start on the nerdy other side of campus. I entered Case Western Reserve as a chemistry major. And after 2 sessions with a rather obtuse calculus professor, I decided to go into history, so here I am. I'm delighted to be here and to talk on this auspicious occasion of the anniversary not only of the system, but to talk about the city of Cleveland as well. And if we talk about water, I think we're all thinking about baths and drinking and whatever else we use it for. But we have to remember that Cleveland really is here because of water. And so I want to go back a little further than Alex wanted me to, but the reason that Moses Cleveland landed where he did was because Lake Erie was here. It was a transport system, and he looked at the potential of the Cuyahoga River to get inland. So it was a good place to set up a city. So water was about transportation. And he already knew that some people had speculated about the importance of the site because of water. Ben Franklin, in looking at old maps at one time, indicated that the site where the Cuyahoga, or whatever it was called at that time, intersected with Lake Erie would be a great strategic point. And then George Washington in the 1700s, when he got to know the Ohio land, thought it would be a great idea if somebody could use the rivers flowing north into Lake Erie and those flowing south into the Ohio River to make a connection to the interior of the Ohio land. And so Cleveland landed here in July of 1796. The place did not grow rapidly. There were just 606 people in Cleveland in 1820, and by 1820 there were actually 2 cities here. We need to talk about that. We are in Ohio City, or it was Ohio City, and there was Cleveland on the other side. There are a lot of stories I could tell about that. The thing that began to really generate the growth of Cleveland and to make it possible to bring this plant into operation was really the completion of the Ohio and Erie Canal, that dream of George Washington. When that occurred in 1832, Cleveland became a major connector. We have to think about water in this sense. The Ohio Canal, which is our canal towpath now, we bike it all the time, at least I do, not only connects Cleveland on Lake Erie with Portsmouth on the Ohio River, but think of it going backwards. So Cleveland on Lake Erie to Buffalo on the Erie Canal, and the Erie Canal to Albany and the Hudson River to New York. You're connected to New York City. In the other direction on the Ohio River, if we're connected to Portsmouth, then you're going to Cincinnati, St. Louis, and to the Gulf of Mexico. So we were in the center of it all. And that's what really boomed and blossomed in Cleveland. And that's what began to bring people here from different areas of the country. My specialty is immigration and ethnicity. That's what you do when you have a last name named Grabowski. You do that. And so if we're looking at Cleveland in the 1830s, Cleveland, which was started as basically a Protestant community, is now getting many immigrants from Ireland. And we're now looking at the Irish town Bend becoming a park area. That was the area. They helped dig the canal. They stayed on. They began becoming stevedores and unloading down in the flats. You begin to get Germans coming into Cleveland. And also Cleveland becomes a site for free blacks to come here. And so the population of African Americans in Cleveland slowly grows over this period. And by 1860, there are 800 free blacks in Cleveland. But it is the canal and the potential of the city and the water that is there. So what about people drinking water at this time? Where did you get it? Well, most of the water that people in early Cleveland had came out of either springs or wells that they had dug. There were cisterns that were eventually established in the city to hold water just in case of fire. And in shortage times, there was a man named Ben Johnson who actually went down to the river or the lake, and he got a barrel full of water, and he would sell it to you for 25 cents. So think about bathing in Cleveland in 1840 and the 1850s. Think about drinking water and what you had to go to get it. And as Cleveland grew, of course, whatever we intook, we outtook, and that went into the river and went into the lake. So we had a system here that needed to be fixed. So we're from wells, springs, and cisterns to this pumping station in the mid-1850s. And we've already described this, the pipe that comes in. It's a cast iron pipe. It's 90 inches wide. It's 300 feet long. And the question is, where was that made? It was probably made here in the west side of Cleveland at the Cuyahoga Steam Furnace Works, which is one of the first industries in Cleveland. And that would eventually morph into a shipyard, shipbuilding system. It has a long genealogy, and American shipbuilding comes out of that. Forgive me for going that way. So that's what's happening. The cost of this installation and civic bonds, and I'm looking at council people here and people in the politics of Cleveland, they had to convince the community to put up $400,000 for bonds. The equivalent of that today is $14 million. And we're looking at a combined population of Cleveland and Ohio City. They would merge in 1854 into a single city of about 25,000 people. So that's what we're looking at, is a diverse city. It's finally merged, not quite. May I go off to the side and talk about the second bridge over the Cuyahoga River? It's the Columbus Road Bridge. It was built by Clevelanders in 1836 to connect Cleveland to the west side. The people in Ohio City did not like it because it siphoned off trade to the west side. So people coming up Pearl Road could go on Columbus Road and market their goods in Cleveland rather than on the west side. I'm an East Sider. I've had biases, okay? So the issue there is what the West Siders did was decided to go down and take the bridge out. So they came down with gunpowder in 1837 and tried to blow the bridge up. The Clevelanders militia came down and they stopped them. This little fracas called the Bridge War. You could, right where Merwin's Wharf is right now, and that just represents the tension between these two sides of the city, but they would come together. Two people seriously injured. It becomes sort of a semi-comical event to remember, but it's a serious thing about bringing a community together. And that's what I'd like to focus on in the 1850s, because what we're looking at really is a city that's about 25,000 people at that time, which by 1860, on the eve of the American Civil War, would have 43,000 people. It's a city that had just come out of a rather difficult Panic of 1837, some years before this, but the Panic of 1837 retarded development here for many years. But the other thing that happens when things develop, Cleveland becomes more connected. I love it. We've got the old Lakeshore, Michigan Southern Main Line right beyond us to the north. So by the 1850s, Cleveland has developed railroads in addition to canals. So we have railroad connections to Pittsburgh, railroad connections that would take you eventually by 1860 to Chicago, to New York. The first railroad in Cleveland in 1851 is the one that goes to Columbus and Cincinnati. That's the one that Amtrak is thinking of putting a passenger train back on now. So we are well connected as a community at that point. The other thing that changes in Cleveland, I think this is fascinating, it's not just the water, maybe it's in the water. As the Catholic population grows here, we get our first Catholic church. It's on the west side of the river. It's in the flats. It's called St. Mary's in the Flats. It started in 1840. By 1852, there are enough Catholics in Cleveland for the Diocese of Cleveland to be established. So we now are a Catholic and Protestant city. But the city is so attractive that in 1839, the first organized group of Jews come here. They're led by a man named Moses Alsbacher, and they come from Unsleben, Bavaria. And they arrive in Cleveland in 1839 at the behest of another Jew who's already here named Simpson Thurman. So we're now Catholic, Protestant, Jewish by this time. I have to talk about this. The Historical Society is a fantastic document. It's the ethical testament that was brought by the Alsbacher party to Cleveland with them, written by their rabbi in Unsleben, Bavaria, lists all the names of all the Jews who are leaving and all the Jews who are coming here. And it tells them, as an ethical testament would, you are coming to a land of new and tempting freedoms and a lot of water. It doesn't say that, I just inserted that. And basically, when you're here, remember to keep the laws and the traditions of your forefathers, because they will give you comfort in your old age. And I think that's a general statement for everybody in Cleveland. Whether we come from the American South, Poland, wherever, we have this connection to the past that's important to us. But let me go on. So the first Jewish congregation, Anshe Hesed, started at that time. And if we're looking at urban growth here, if we go down to Merwin Street, Merwin's Wharf again, as the canal develops, that becomes a commodities exchange district where people buy wholesale and they sell retail. And there's a young man who comes to Cleveland from a place called Richfield, New York, gets a commercial education in Cleveland. He starts as a commodities broker there. You may know his name. It's John D. Rockefeller. So in the 1850s, he's a young man on the move, and by 1863, he will start the beginnings of what is the Standard Oil Company. So this is all happening around this area. And then, what about the Cuyahoga River? Well, it's getting more polluted, but it's also a site for rowing in the 1850s. So we have two rowing clubs here, the Ivanhoe Club and the Yedrad Club. And they row on the river until it gets too polluted and the Civil War breaks out and they begin to move away. So the city is really growing, it's diversifying, it's creating the basis of industry, it's creating money. And it's also creating a reputation for itself, because Cleveland is also known within the African American community in the 1850s as Hope. It's a code name for it as a station on the Underground Railroad. And one of the things we know is, and we can go to University Circle, the Cozad Bates Interpretive Center there on the Underground Railroad, is this city, blacks and whites working together, not everybody in this base, but working together to take people, enslaved people seeking freedom, coming north, probably through Massillon and through the Quaker areas. They would also come up the west side. They were helped by white people and black people. Like, there's an interesting man on the west side. His name is Alfred Greenbrier. He was a black farm owner. He had horses, and the story is that he used his horses to bring slaves over. And we know that St. John's Episcopal Church, right around the corner from us, was one of the areas where they watched the ships, where slaves would get onto a ship, again it's water, and go to Canada for ultimate freedom. So that's part of what's going on there. Fascinating man working down in the flats, down in this area on Superior Avenue. Superior used to go right down to the flats. It joined Merwin Street. There was a hotel called the New England House. There was a barber in the hotel named John Brown. John Brown, not the John Brown we're thinking of, John Brown, an African-American barber. And John Brown was perhaps the last person that many African-Americans who were fleeing slavery would go to, and he would take them to a boat on the lake, and they would go on to safety for that. So that is the setting up of a city that would, by 1920, with the development of industry, which would bring many, many more people here, by 1920, it would be the 5th largest city in the United States. Its industrial production would also be 5th largest. And its diversity was exemplified by the fact that 35,000 members of that population were African Americans fleeing Jim Crow in the South, and 2/3 of that population was made up of people who were either born abroad or were the children of people who were born abroad. But before we would get to that, and I will end on this, Cleveland would end up in 1861 in the American Civil War. And the Civil War is part of the city's history as well. One of the monuments here, we're looking at Scowden. I think that structure is his monument, in a way. Soldiers and Sailors Monument is really a symbol of the city's growth and really contribution to the continuity of the Union. We are looking at 10,000 people from Cuyahoga County who served in the armies in the Civil War. That's transformative, but having water available for fires, for drinking, for bathing, to grow a system, as you mentioned, Alex, that would spread out into multiple intake areas and to serve the entire community. This is a miracle that we take for granted. We don't think about it. We turn it on, we use it, we don't think about it. And if we do think about it, we think about it for ourselves. But do we think about it in the wider sense and how it helped develop the community that we live in today? It's a pleasure to be here, be part of this occasion. Thanks so much.
John, thank you so much. And here's a few little trinkets for you. Okay. And thanks for your participation.
My pleasure.
Today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, John. So again, Dr. Grabowski, thank you for setting the stage for what Cleveland was like back then. Our next speaker is Brenda Culler. She's the Water Quality Communications Coordinator for Cleveland Water. Now, Brenda came to us from ODNR, and she is passionate about a lot of things. And I think her passion for Lake Erie, everything Lake Erie, is unmatched. She will come up with the incredible little details and facts about the lake that I don't think any of us knew about. And now she has a passion for the history of Cleveland Water as well. So Brenda is going to give us a little presentation about Mr. Scowden. Thank you, Brenda.
It is said in some cultures that when you speak a person's name after their death, their history and their legacy lives on. Today, with this road renaming, the way of Theodore Scowden will be remembered. The way Scowden worked and lived, the character traits that he embodied, are ones that we can all strive to achieve in our personal lives. Scowden was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in June of 1815 to Theodore Scowden II and Sarah Ransom Hazard. The family moved to Cincinnati before Scowden's 5th birthday, and from an early age, Scowden tinkered with engineering design. Living near the Ohio River, he developed a passion for steamships. Steam engines would become his life's work. Just days after his 21st birthday, he married Rosetta Stewart, and about a year later, their first son was born. By the age of 29, Scowden was designing steam engines, and he was quickly recruited to the city of Cincinnati to update their waterworks design with new pump engines and to replace their logs where it mostly conveyed water at the time. It took Scowden 7 years, but he was extremely successful and his reputation was starting to grow. He kept this water flowing during that time to the city that was the largest in Ohio of 50,000. We really must thank Cincinnati Water for a number of things, including sending us Scowden in the early 1850s. They also sent us Joseph Elms in the early 1900s. But most importantly to our future, they sent Scowden on a European trip for 2 months. Alex, I would like one. To study water, works, sewerage, drainage, and public docks. This trip was a formative point in Scowden's career. There's no known itinerary of what Scowden did when he was in Europe in 1851, but his trip was from April to June. And there were some pretty important events occurring in Europe at the time. London was dealing with a massive cholera outbreak that would go on for decades. The Thames River was becoming more polluted, and London was hosting the Great Exhibition of 1851, which was the precursor to the World's Fair. The Great Exhibition was being held in a 1 million square foot structure known as the Crystal Palace. The latest technology from 14,000 exhibitors from around the world were on display. Noteworthy was the centerpiece of the exhibition hall. It was a 27-foot tall crystal fountain made with silver metal, and Queen Victoria herself used it to launch the exposition. While we don't know whose idea it was on this day, 165 years ago, that Cleveland leaders also used an ornate water fountain in the center of Public Square that could shoot water up 50 feet in the air to celebrate the start of water pumpage here. The grand celebration and the opening of Cleveland Water occurred also in many visitors in town. It was for the 7th annual Ohio State Fair. Scowden's 1851 European trip also included visits to many waterworks, where he copied their designs by hand. He would later write, "During my sojourn in Europe, especially at the English metropolis, I had the frequent opportunities afforded me, through the politeness of different hydraulic engineers, to witness the operations and examine several Cornish engines. This design he would bring to Cleveland." When Scowden returned to the States, he quickly wrote up a report for Cincinnati, finished their water system, and then turned his full attention to our great city. Scowden had already been in consultation with 4 pretty prominent men who had been appointed in 1850 to write a feasibility study on how to build Cleveland's water system. You may have heard of those men: William Case, William J. Warner, Jared P. Kirtland, and Charles Whittlesey. You may have also read the Pure Water Report, which presented data stating Lake Erie was among the best water sources in the United States. It recommended using pump engines of a Cornish design, and it also admitted that most of the information in the report actually came from Theodore Ransom Scowden, and oh, by the way, we should hire him. Cleveland hired him, and Scowden's written report fleshing out the designs for a pump station, water mains, and reservoir arrived in Cleveland from Cincinnati in February of 1853. A few weeks later, Scowden himself came and presented his plans to council and the papers, and they were well received. While Cleveland leaders liked the direction Scowden was heading, the first location picked for a waterworks system was on the east side of the Cuyahoga River. The committee's first report proposed building an intake off of Frontier Street, which is today's current 18th Street, which many Cleveland water employees park at. That location was publicly called into question in the papers because every time the Cuyahoga River, the turbid water would reach this part. Now, if you ever get invited to Alex's office after a really good storm, you can see the Cuyahoga River still leaves its turbidity all along the eastern front of Cleveland, while the western side of the city's water remains clear, and especially by our current intakes. But pure source water at the time was even more important than it is today, because back then, There was no filtration. There was no disinfection. It was just served straight from the lake to their tap. And it would be more than 5 decades before that would change. A few months later, in June of 1853, Scowden came up with a second report, and it had 3 options for building a water system. The site he liked best was right here where we're standing today, and it had advantages because the reservoir built up that hill on Kentucky Street was 31 feet higher than any place in Cleveland. The reservoir could be built to hold a larger quantity of water. The quality of the water on the west side of the river was far purer, and there would be a long-term cost savings because it was easier to obtain coal from the canals and the railroad tracks on this side of this river than it was on the east side. There was only one small hiccup, as Mr. Grabowski mentioned. This was Ohio City, and the cities hated each other. But some deals were struck, and it turns out that if you tell the mayor he can become the mayor of a bigger city, he's going to convince his voters to allow annexation to occur. Annexation officially happened after an April 3rd, 1854 vote. The annexation happened in June, and 1 month later, the official construction of Cleveland Water Works began. If you look around you today, you might not realize that where you are sitting was an estuarine wetland. Very muddy, very wet, very filled with mosquitoes and frogs. So building our pump station was no small feat. In fact, when men came here to do soil testing, 4 men were able to shove a 30-foot long rod 28 feet into the soil. They couldn't shove it farther because the rod stopped. It took 5 steam engines and pumps to dig a foundation, but the steam engines could only reach 14 feet down, and they still hadn't hit solid ground. So Scowden developed a way to float logs into place and then put spacers in between there, which he filled with cement that would harden after it was exposed to water. Scowden succeeded in building the pump house. It was built, it is said, without a single crack in the foundation. An 1856 paper wrote, "The difficulties to be surmounted in the erection of the pump house and aqueduct were so extraordinary a character that Mr. Scowden's most sanguine supporters doubted his ability to overcome them, but modest confidence in his own resources sustained him until success regarded him with the recognition of his rank among the ablest engineers in the country." Scowden didn't keep this knowledge to himself. In fact, he was willing to share it with others. 2 of Scowden's mentors was familiar to other water systems, including Cincinnati and Louisville, or they would become. One was Charles Hermanni, who first worked for Cleveland as an engineer, became Scowden's right-hand assistant, and then would go on to serve Louisville Water for 50 years as their superintendent and chief engineer. The other mentor I'll mention today was Scowden's son, Ransom, who would also go on to serve Cincinnati and Louisville Water in various roles, including chief engineer, chief of sanitary sewage, and just chief of the city of engineering for Cincinnati. Ransom would promote Scowden's one holistic view of water. This is another one of Scowden's ways. Scowden knew the importance of building water, a way to remove the dirty water at the same time you were pumping folks clean water. In his first reports to Cleveland, Scowden emphasized that building sewage system along with a water system would keep the residents of the city healthy, and it would also save money because you were killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Scowden was also generations of time ahead of his time in calling for water pollution control laws. In 1853, he wrote, "As a further protective measure, stringent ordinances should be passed and enforced, prohibiting the deposit of nuisance anywhere along the lakeshore within the corporate limits of the city." Scowden's way of honorable service and high ethics he instilled in his children, and they carried them on as well. And one of the ways it's very amusing is myself, I have an 18-year-old, but Scowden's son Ransom was 18 at the time. He took out a notice in the Cleveland Plain Dealer which said, "I hereby forbid all persons trusting or harboring my son Ransom Scowden on my account, as I will not pay debt whatever of his conducting." I don't know what Scowden did to make his father that angry that he took a month-long out in a paper, but I can tell you the lesson stuck, as Ransom was once fired from a public service job for not taking a bribe. He was unanimously appointed a couple weeks later by that same city to serve in a different job. Scowden mentored his other children too. In the early 1870s, Scowden worked in San Francisco. He was engineering designs to drain tidelands and turn them into agricultural fields. And he also was hired by San Francisco at $750 a month at the time to develop their water system. During these trips, he brought his daughter along. Her name was Carrie, and she married a very handsome doctor named William Moyler. Scowden's son Leo Alexander would also accompany his father to work in California under the name Scowden and Son Engineering. Leo would become a prominent engineer in surveying for the mining field, and I couldn't find the connection. Maybe you can help me, but there is a mountain named Mount Scowden in California. Modesty, though, was another of Theodore Scowden's ways. When construction of the Louisville Waterworks was nearly complete, Scowden took on a second job at the same time, which was to double the size of the locks on the falls of the Ohio River. Construction of the locks along the Mason-Dixon line began during the heat of the Civil War, but Scowden wanted no publicity. Instead, the cornerstone of the second largest locks in the world was laid, and so quietly done that no one but the workmen who gathered around the engineer when he was setting the massive block into its place knew that the great work had begun. Scowden was modest, but he would take to the papers to defend his reputation. In one case, he outlined 10 reasons why the site he chose was the best place to build a waterworks, even though the public had in mind at the time that it could be more efficiently done downstream of the city. He tried to explain that that's where your sewage was and you didn't want to drink it. We fully appreciate that now. But in his note in the paper, he said, "I am writing this one letter explaining why I picked the location, and then I will drop the subject in public prints. It cannot be expected that the president, directors, and engineer of the Louisville Water Company have either the time or inclination to enter into a fruitless newspaper controversy with every anxious writer who misapprehends the motives and finds fault with us." Scowden knew that a simple, plain, common-sense plan for waterworks was far cheaper than a complicated one. He respected that taxpayers' dollars should be spent wisely, and he was resolute that once a cost-effective design was settled upon, that no expense should be spared to make sure that that design was perfected so it could last for generations. The Cornish engines that Scowden designed here for Cleveland are a perfect example of design that would last. He actually wrote about this in his 1855 engineering report, and he said, "Neither pains nor expense has been spared to bring the engines to the highest state of mechanical perfection. The constant aim has been to construct a pair of pumping engines for Cleveland Waterworks, unsurpassed by any other in the world. The work speaks for itself. These engines were so beautiful and so novel as the first west of the Allegheny Mountains that people would come down to the pump station and just sit and watch them work." The steam engines were continuously used in the Cleveland water system for nearly 50 years. First at the Division Street pump station, then in 1884 they were moved to the Fairmount pump station, where they worked until someone paid to take them out in 1905, as Cleveland Water and the city of Cleveland had grown and needed much larger engines. At the time, it was calculated that the two engines Scowden designed had pumped together a combined 146 billion gallons of water to the citizens of our city. But Scowden did more than design beautiful engines. He envisioned waterworks as being community assets that we could all use. Case in point was the Kentucky Street Reservoir, which he designed with pathways leading up to its precipice and walkways around it, and a beautiful iron lattice preventing people from falling in, because the promenade around the reservoir became the place you would go to court a young lad or lass. We know the beauty of Scowden's design, what that was first implemented in Cleveland, was only enhanced as he traveled to other places to design and build their waterworks. Designing, consulting, and building steam engines and waterworks was the foundation of Scowden's career, but he simultaneously maintained other roles, including as a lawyer, a bank owner. He owned partners of a hydropower and a cement manufacturing company. He had a role in selling out California tidelands, and he had inventions, investments, and patents in the steel industries, just to name a few. But very noteworthy is that many of the places that Scowden worked hired him back to design future improvements. Cleveland was one of those places. Cleveland rehired Scowden as a consultant to design our first 5-foot diameter water intake tunnel to connect Scowden's pump station out to purer water. While Scowden spent much time in other cities during his life's work, Scowden came to love the land, and the Cleveland press felt the same way about him. A July 1857 editorial exclaimed, "We claim Scowden as a citizen of Cleveland, and shall be glad to see him after his work elsewhere is disposed of, return to enjoy a residence where he has won an enviable fame in his profession." Cleveland was home. In 1864, Theodore and Rosetta Scowden purchased and resided in a grand mansion on Euclid Avenue. His personal residence and ground were more beautiful than most of the homes on Millionaires Row. Aside from Scowden's home's beauty, he was very quiet about his wealth, but he would make generous donations to local charities, on more than one occasion donating 5 times more than the next highest donor. Scowden retired from work in 1880. He and his wife Rosetta moved into the Luther Moses house on Lexington Avenue, where he lived the final 2 years of his life. His daughter Anna Scowden Garrettson and her husband took over the grand mansion. Theodore Ransom Scowden III died on December 31st, 1881, while in Florida, trying to recover from an illness. Upon the news, Cleveland mourned. Perhaps there is no better judge of one's impact on a community than the words used to describe you when after you are gone. The hometown obituary describes Scowden using words including kindness of heart, graciousness of manner, ingenuity and skill, pleasant gentleman, devoted husband, fascinating companion, affectionate parent, excessively modest, brilliant hydraulics engineer. These words embody Scowden's way. May we and future generations remember Scowden and his way every time this road's name is spoken. So with that, we also know that Louisville Water, who also appreciated Scowden's remarkable engineering and skill, we're going to play a video from them. There was one more quote that I personally can connect to Scowden with, and he wrote in a paper that I will invite any gentleman who would like more information to call at my office, and I will take great pleasure in going into a more detailed explanation. Thank you.
Hi.
First, thank you to Spencer Bruce and the folks at Louisville Water for that very nice testament. And how about, again, a great round of applause for Brenda for that fabulous presentation on Mr. Scowden. I think you all realize what we had known for some time about her love for history. A few personal reflections and thoughts about Theodore Scowden that I had. It was around 2005 that we figured out that our 150th anniversary was coming up in 2006. So we started doing some history digging of our own, and we found out about the Ohio State Fair, the fact that they were barnstorming around the state instead of being fixed in Columbus at the time, and that it was in Cleveland in 1856, the year the water system was supposed to come live. So they chose, and I did not know that detail about Scowden seeing the great fountain in London that probably inspired him. So it was on a Wednesday, September 24th, 1856, that the pump station right up the street here was turned on, and it fed that fountain on Public Square 2.5 miles away from here. In Scowden's report from 1856, he described that fountain. He said it was a capacious fountain of chaste and beautiful design that was erected, from which was thrown a jet of pure crystal water high into the air, which was the greatest attraction in the city and gratified thousands of admiring spectators. And I think this is more than just idle talk from him. Just think, as Dr. Grabowski talked about earlier, what you had to do to get water. You did not have internal plumbing at the time. You had springs, or you grabbed a bucket and you went and got your water. So I think the promise of having water inside your own home really was a source of great joy for these people. I think they were very sincere in their huzzas at that time. I started digging deeper at the time to find out about who were the key players in bringing this water system to life. looking at annual reports, doing digging on the internet, and it soon became very obvious that Theodore Ransom Scowden was the centerpiece that pulled this entire enterprise together. I looked at all that he had to pull off to birth this water system. Brenda talked a little bit about the conceptual options that he laid out, whether the lake or the river should be the source, and which side of the river to build the waterworks on. He had to get decisions from the leaders of the city. He created detailed design drawings. He had to perform the bid and award of the construction contracts. He facilitated the creation of whole new industries in town, like cast iron pipe foundries, to build that first 11 miles of pipe. He oversaw the construction and installation of the facilities, including that intake pipe that I talked about right underneath us here, the pump station up the road there, the 6 million gallon open air reservoir on Franklin Avenue called the Kentucky Street Reservoir at the time, the laying of those first 11 miles of pipe, including a major river crossing underneath the Cuyahoga River to bring water from west to east. He had to commission the system, and then he had to install service connections to individual homes. And then he had to transition into operating this system. And the amazing part of it all, he did all that in 3 years. This is what is so mind-blowing to me. I have been here in our engineering section for over 30 years, involved in running a major capital program. And what he did in such a short time, I think would be impossible today. And again, it's just mind-boggling to me. You also got a sense from Brenda, too. This was a man who did not cut corners. He installed a first-rate water system here. Cleveland Water has had a long legacy of having very high-quality standards in the building of our water system. And that's a legacy that he started from day one and that we continue to strive at doing. As you heard, he was in great demand around the country. And again, as great as an engineer as he was a great person as well. Brenda mentioned some of the words that was spoken about him. The same things that I had. What a pleasant gentleman he was, a privilege of those who were close acquaintance to him, a kindness of heart, a graciousness of manner, a fascinating companion, devoted husband, and an affectionate parent. So again, he was a great engineer, but he was an even greater man. He did become a hero to me. So of course I had to go and find and visit his family home on Lexington Avenue. I visited he and his wife Rosetta's gravesite at Lakeview Cemetery, a very impressive monument there. So ever since then, ever since 2006, we've been thinking of ways to properly honor him. I always thought it was a little bit of an oversight. At one time, Cleveland did think enough of him that it did name a street after him near the Cuyahoga River. But that disappeared when Cleveland standardized to numbering its streets in 1906. So when we reconfigured our campus down here a few years ago, we created this new street that you're sitting on now, and we finally saw our opportunity to name this new street after him. And so here we are today. So again, it is with great pleasure that we will now unveil the signs here for Scowden Way. So I think we're going to take some few folks with us. Director, you want to join us? Ready?